Hello, how you doing? So today I thought I'd talk about a study that landed on my desk a few weeks ago. It's called High Intensity Interval Training, Optimizing Oxygen Consumption and Time to Exhaustion. That's basically a very big way of saying VO2 max. So let's just start by defining what is VO2 max. I asked the bot. VO2 max is a measure of the maximum amount of oxygen that a person can consume per minute during intense exercise. It is used as an indicator of cardiovascular fitness and endurance. A higher VO2 max indicates better overall fitness. Yes, that's all pretty accurate. However, VO2 max, while it's important, it's not everything, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit down the track. So coming back to this study here, what did they do in this study? Well, they aim to compare different interval structures on their accumulated time at or close to VO2 max. So just a few quick tidbits on this trial. 9 active males, 35 years old, VO2 max of 52, so they weren't anything special. There's nothing to talk about there. But we'll come down to what they actually did. So they obtained their critical velocity, which is the running equivalent of critical power in cyclists. Sorry, I should have mentioned as well, everything we're talking about here can be inferred to a certain degree back to cycling. We need to use caution when we do that, but it can be inferred. So just coming to what did they do? What they did was actually quite interesting. So they gave 3 different groups different priming, quote unquote, intervals. So they basically sent them out for 6 minutes each at full gas, more or less. So they're 6-minute full gas power. Based off of what they, or 6-minute full gas speed, based off of what they gained from the critical velocity test, or critical speed test. And each of these 6-minute intervals had an off section in it, relief, whatever you want to call it. And in certain intervals here, they were either at the start or the end. So this was essentially a priming interval. This was to peg their physiology at VO2. From there, they moved into the actual training per se. So this group here, the first group, they had long intervals. So this was the long interval group. The second group had I think they called it HRDT, so descending intervals. So they started with a 180-second interval. They moved into 120, 60, 45, and so on. So they moved down, they started at long-ish intervals, and they moved down to shorter intervals. And then the last group was just your traditional 30-30s that we've all done. Everyone's done 30-30s at some point. We all know what it feels and what it looks like. It's super easy to do, no big deal. So let's come down and have a look at the results. So if we are looking at the chart on the left here, so chart A, we can see the time that each of these groups spent above 90% of their VO2 max. So the short interval group spent about the same amount of time, close to or very above 90% of their VO2 max as the long interval group. But what they found was the group that had the descending interval, so the ones that started long and got shorter, actually accumulated more time closer to their true VO2 max. So where have we seen this before? I loathe to share this, but we've seen this before. Take a look at this. What does that look like? It looks like Trainer Road. As you can see here, this particular session has started with longer intervals and progressively got shorter over time. So it's interesting that these guys were perhaps ahead of the curve. Perhaps we're catching up with them. I don't know. Now, I mentioned at the start of this video that VO2 max is not everything. It is important, but it's not everything. So I'll bring you back to this chart here. This was in the San Milan Indigo study that I published in the last video that I did. And here we see typical power output to lactate curve. So we spoke about this, 2 millimoles of lactate being anything below that we can consider zone 1 in a 3-zone model. 2 to 4 millimoles of lactate, so through the middle here we consider zone 2 in a 3-zone model, and above that zone 3. Now Just because you have a very high VO2 max, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a very good lactate curve like this, okay? Your lactate curve could still look very anaerobic like this, even with a very high VO2. So what does that mean for cyclists and runners? It means that you could have a very high VO2, but you're going to spend a lot of time in a very high training zone. So being a zone 2 or a zone 3 training zone if you are quote unquote inefficient. Now, there are a few other cautions that we need to take with this particular study as well. One, all they did was they just looked at time accumulated at VO2 max. This was not a longitudinal study. It was not looked at over 12 weeks or a training block or something like that. So does training per se, like the trainer road example, actually elicit improvements in VO2 max? That's to be determined. We know that we can train at higher VO2 max using these descending interval structures, but whether that actually turns out to be beneficial is a different story. And there are other factors involved, like I said, lactate, peak power output, things like that. Anyway, I'm trying to keep this video as short as I can. I hope you enjoyed it. This will be on YouTube as well. At the risk of sounding cliche, please like, subscribe, share, all that bullshit. And I will see you in the next one. Cheers. Peace.